How to Run Your Building is proudly sponsored by Schneider Buchel, the preeminent and trusted legal partner for co-ops, condominiums, and homeowners associations across New York State. With a team of skilled attorneys and a singular focus on community association law, they tackle everything from high-stakes litigation and contract negotiations to day-to-day legal challenges. Whether it's resolving disputes, securing financing, or ensuring smooth governance, Schneider Buchel delivers innovative solutions tailored to each community's unique needs. Discover how they can support your board at schneiderbuchel.com. Now, let's dive into the conversation.
Welcome to Habitat's Management Roundtable Series, where we have gathered leading New York City property management executives to help boards understand one of the universal challenges in a co-op or a condo's life, switching management companies. While boards make this change hoping for better service and results, the incoming management team inherits a complex web of unresolved issues, strained relationships, and sky-high expectations. To help smooth out these rocky roads, I'd like to introduce our distinguished panel. Joining me today is Peter von Simpson, CEO of New Bedford Management, Michael Feldman, CEO of Choice Management, and Dan Wollman, CEO of Gumley Haft Management. Before we discuss transition challenges in detail, I'd like to go around the table and ask each of you to call out the toughest part of establishing a new management relationship. Is it the fix or is it the board's response to the fix? Dan, why don't you start?
The fix is obviously a big part of it, but it is the board's response to a fix. I think a lot of times boards are not on board with what the fix is.
And Peter, how about you?
Sure. No, and I think it's somewhere in the middle. And I think Dan's response is appropriate in that way. When we transition into a new building and they sign with New Bedford, they sort of know what we're about, right? A deep dive into their financials and their compliance department and their capital projects. So if they're going to select us, they know what we're about already. So usually that first 60 to 90 days is sort of a sweetheart period where they're as open-minded as they're going to be. And so then it's really our job to provide not just a problem, but options for solutions that are hopefully affordable and can be completed in a reasonable amount of time.
Michael?
Yeah, I think certainly there are elements of both. Ultimately, it's about trust, and there are levels of trust. There's a trust level for them to go and engage you and then hire a new company and switch over. But then there's a different higher level of trust that's required that you want to work towards, that you can only really gain from proving your worth. And those first 90, 150 days are critical.
All right, Dan, when we spoke about these challenges, you told me about a condo you took on who came to you with an unsafe local law 11 filing, a $4.6 million contract in front of them that was unrealistic in terms of timing and cost, and the coup de grace, no money. I'm sure the fix was challenging, but my guess is so was the board. Can you share what was going on there and what were your steps?
So I think sort of apropos of your first question, the assignment was to develop a fix. And the second part of that assignment, as you were suggesting earlier, is to get the board fully in tune or fully on board with the fix. In that particular situation, the building had no money. The building had been administratively unsafe. So there was a bridge on both sides of the building. They were about ready to enter into a roughly $4.5 million facade contract that they needed an assessment for. The contract also suggested or inferred that the work would be done in 12 months, which would have been both physically and economically impossible. And they had a pile of payables. The fix in that building was we met with some additional contractors for the local law work. We were able to negotiate a contract at $4.2 million. We had a much more realistic time frame, which was a 2-year time frame. The board then set an assessment on a 2-year time frame as opposed to a 1-year time frame. The board needed to institute a $500,000 operating assessment to cover all their unpaid bills. And then we developed a more realistic budget. And then for January 1st, they took a 12% increase.
I want to jump in here. Now, I'm going to assume that the board, they're not stupid people. And I'm going to assume that the condominium had financials every year. What I don't understand is how they were operating with a budget that apparently was not realistic.
I think most people would agree that many boards are apathetic, or many residents are apathetic. The board was not raising common charges year after year. They were both building up their payables and eating up all of their cash. There was a large change in the composition of the board, and then the board started to do a much deeper dive into their finances. They knew they had to spend $4 million or excess $4 million, on the restoration project, and they started to dig much deeper into the finances.
So they dug much deeper, but they were with their previous management company. They were given, I presume, management reports. They were given, their accountant did prepare a financial statement. Did any of this not appear on those two documents?
I think for people who looked at the documents, they would have come to the same conclusion that we came to and that the board ultimately came to. As I said earlier, people are apathetic. Lots of people are disinterested. Maybe disinterested is too strong a term, but when your common charges or your maintenance are not increasing and you're not really thinking much about it, you're saying this is a great place to live. If you live in a home out in the suburbs, you know that your expenses are going up every year. We know that in managing buildings, condominiums, for example, labor might be 50% or more of the budget. And if the labor contract increases on average 3 or 3.5% a year, you automatically need a 1.5 or 2% increase. So for people who aren't really paying attention, they think it's a great place to be. For people who are paying attention are saying, I don't understand how the building is operating this way. And over time, more and more people who were more sophisticated got involved and said, hey guys, I don't understand what's going on here. How are we going to pay for all this stuff?
Okay. Peter, before turning to you, I want to ask all of you, if after taking on a new client who presumably came with financial or other issues, how tough is it to tell the board something it doesn't want to hear? And how long would you give the board to take your advice before you walked away?
Yeah, sure. So for us, we're not doing a forensic audit. We're really looking at the outgoing management companies' financial reports, the auditors' reports, looking at the open payables, as Dan is describing, capital projects, and we are coming back to them with a blue sky, and we describe it as that, right? So blue sky, this is where your maintenance should be, to be at break even, and also to have a reserve replacement, some process. If you have a loan and however else you're going to fund your capital project. So it's really important that they have that information. And then we try to give them some options and timelines to get there. So as Michael was describing earlier, trust is a big part of it. We're not relying on trust, but we know that in order for them to trust us, we have to support every line item. The new world of property management is transparency. Every line item on your budget has to have supporting documentation and the ability and the willingness to communicate that to everyone, at least on an annual basis, so that what Dan is describing doesn't happen. It's not the prior board was good or bad. It's the fact that that information wasn't being disseminated out to people so that they all knew what was at stake and could then make decisions, whether to be more involved in the board or in some way, or to make financial changes in their own life to prepare for a large assessment. That's the miss. And that's how this world has changed so much in property management, is that you're not going to get a second chance.
Would you walk away if the board didn't come to grips with reality?
I mean, it's not one size fits all. So in addition to just assessing for it, which obviously is an option to get the money up front, we could see if they could file and would qualify for the new J51, which we've been using in all kinds of buildings right now, that it doesn't offset the upfront cost, but it makes the pain sort of a lot easier to absorb. The city council grants in some instances for the neediest of buildings, which we've taken advantage of, or just a traditional loan. Although those rates have gone higher, there's still an option even for condominiums today. So what we try to do is provide options and costs and timeline and try to take the temperature down because in almost all circumstances, there is a way out. You can take a loan out that doesn't have full amortization, right? So that can keep your costs pretty low. But that work does have to get done. The only way I would walk away from a board is if they wanted to do something and take an action that I thought was really detrimental to themselves and to the people that live there, something that would create an unsafe environment. But we would have multiple conversations before that happened. And thankfully for me, I don't recall that ever happened.
Michael, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously difficult to have hard conversations if you're inheriting a situation that's dire. But I would submit, Carol, and I'm sure Peter would agree, that it's harder ultimately to not have those conversations. You have to be candid with your boards where they are. If you need a special assessment to deal with payables that have built up, if you need to raise common charges significantly, it's not pleasant, but it's what has to happen. Ultimately, you end up in a better place by right sizing the ship. I mean, it stands to reason when you're taking on a new engagement, the preceding management company left something to be desired. And often I'd like to start by bifurcating the issues into physical and economic. The physical ones are often ongoing. You have to deal with them on a go forward, where the economic, at least if you can sort it on a go forward, time does heal those wounds.
Okay, Peter, when we spoke about this topic, you told me about a new condo your firm took on who came with rampant conspiracy theories floating around the building and a money problem. I'm assuming that the conspiracies drove the board to find new management, but I would guess the first order of business was to understand what the competing narratives were. So can you give us sort of an insight to what was going on there and what did you do?
Yeah, so it's sort of also touching on what we were talking about previously. Actually, the management company had called it quits. I didn't know this management company. It was not anyone on this call. And I'm not sure it's anyone that you've actually interviewed with, but they were a smaller company. And they just said, for the amount of ill humor and attacks that we're having, you're just not paying us enough to deal with this. And I think I understand what they went through. So what we have tried to do, and honestly, I think everybody here would agree, no boards are changing management companies if everything's going really well or even pretty well. Most boards, they'll try to work it out with you if there's a hiccup, but other than that, they're willing to go forward. In this case, the operating budget was not sufficient. They were relying on their vendors to basically loan them the money. The vendors were getting upset, not servicing the building. The open payables continued to accrue. And you had this, race to the bottom where they didn't have the money. People weren't having the services. And the management company was saying, you're blaming us, but you're not giving us the tools to fix this. So take us out of here. That gave us, I think, a little bit more support going in than with most new accounts, in that everyone agreed, like, we're not keep going like this. So what we said to them was, we have a very transparent financial system. Let's put everything in the system. Let's move away from all these miscellaneous expenses. Let's show everybody what your operating account looks like. You can say the common charges are too high or the common charges are too low, but if you look at your actual budget and you look at the discretionary spending being, I would say, 5%, and that's being generous in this case, it's hard to really blame the board or management company for that state of the building. So we did that, and we went back to the board first and presented this to them. We also got on a Zoom call. We presented this to all owners. The board was being challenged, some people might say attacked, by this other group of owners, and saying that they wanted to see the books and records because they felt like things were not happening that needed to happen in the building and wanted to understand why. The board was offended by that. And what I said to them, and I'm not sure they really appreciated this so far, but right away was, this is their money. This is your community. You have nothing to hide. This stuff is toast with a little bit of butter. There's nothing in here that you should not disclose. So rather than go through this exercise of having multiple attorneys involved, bring them in. We'll sit with them. We'll walk them through every line item, understanding the bank accounts are not going to be reconciled for that month, and we're not going to have audited financials. So there's some caveats to that. Let's show them the books. And ultimately, that conversation took place, and we were able to present that. There were Very few follow-up questions. The attacks died away. It did raise concerns because it made it very obvious that they didn't have the money to really operate the building as they were all saying they wanted, increase in staffing, additional door people, but there was no money to do these things. So when a certain number of that other group said, you know what, I don't necessarily agree with this board. I certainly don't like them, but I'm not going to be part of a lawsuit. I'm going to everything back down. And that is sort of where we are now. We continue to develop both a CapEx below the line plan as well as work, and they're on a cash flow break-even basis on their operating budget, and we've paid off all their open payables, so their vendors are servicing them again. Things are still a work in progress on the service and on some of the repairs, but I think everybody sees that there is a way forward.
So before turning to Michael, I want to ask all of you about out of whack budgets. We've just heard about two properties that didn't have enough money to operate properly. You run management companies and you prepare budgets. So how does this happen? Dan?
So there are boards that are realistic and there are boards that are unrealistic. There are boards who believe their mission, well, is A, to keep the maintenance down, which is fair and appropriate. But there are times where we review budgets with boards and they go through these things on a line by line basis. And they say, for flowers, let's say, we're not going to spend 15,000, we're going to spend 10,000, just to squeeze a budget back into a maintenance increase that they think is going to be palatable to the residents of the building. You can't run your building based on what you think is going to be palatable to the people who live there. You need to run your building based on what it's going to cost to actually run the building. So people sometimes try to fool themselves that whatever numbers we're putting on the paper are the right numbers.
I find that a little scary. I would hate to think that your new clients who seem to have money problems, there may be other issues, but the budgets aren't correct. They're not living their financial life in a realistic way. And the previous company that they had hired either hasn't forced them, wasn't able to force them. I'm sure the previous company was competent enough to do that. Peter?
Yeah, if there's a way out, to Dan's point, if there's someone on the board who says maybe they can't afford to live there, which doesn't make them a bad person, right? They are on limited income or just their living expenses are such, they're going to look for line items that they can move that will somehow then make that increase, if not lesser, non-existent. We really try to hold firm. Most of our buildings, just because of the kind of management company that we are, we're dealing with mostly, mid-sized buildings, between 50 and 150 units. There's not a big flower line item. What we're dealing with is fuel, staffing, taxes, insurance. And what we're trying to lay out to them is, as fiduciaries, you really don't have this option. You don't have the option to run this thing into the ground. Can't afford to live here. By all means, you have to let people know that part of this is to protect their investment. So running this thing into the ground, it's tough for them individually, but it's also bad for them as an investment. For most of the people that we work with, this apartment is probably the largest investment that they have. So that rings home. And then what we also do, which is what a lot of boards are afraid of because it's their neighbors, is we say, we'll lead the budget. We'll lead the budget Zoom with the building. We'll answer all their questions. We'll bring their accountant on who's also reviewed the budget. We create all of our budgets, but we still would lead that conversation. Let the naysayers come. I want to speak to them. That's the point of it, right? To try to do it and not have their feedback, it just hurts everybody. So understanding that the board's job as fiduciary is to run the building at least at break even at a minimum. We get on the call, show the budget. We go through it line by line. Feel free to chat your questions, raise your hand. We'll call people one at a time. At the end of that conversation, people are not always happy. You could have a 12% increase. As Dan is describing, that's not impossible, especially where insurance. But it is not a case where people can say, I hate my board because they don't care and they're raising the common charges just to get me out of here, which is clearly not the case because they're paying exactly the same common charges. It doesn't even make any sense. So that transparency, and that is the new world. I'm not saying we did this 10 years ago, but for the last 5 years, really, as Zoom has taken off, any sort of beyond 4% increase, we expect that we're going to be on a Zoom call presenting the budget.
Michael, when we spoke about funding shortfalls, you suggested ways that management companies could keep this issue in front of boards who really were having a difficult time confronting this reality. Can you share some examples of how you have done this and the outcome?
Yeah, look, I think conceptually, you can take a jab. You want to avoid the big uppercuts, right? So those 2, 4, 6% increases, that's healthy generally. What's not healthy is when you don't have an increase for year after year, and then all of a sudden you have, these massive issues. So we really first orient the boards to the reality that utilities go up, insurance premiums go up, co-ops taxes go up, and there's really no way around modest annual increases. Typically, you could have an unusual year here and there, but for the most part, you can pretty much book that there's going to be some sort of modest increase that's unavoidable. Most of the expenses in the budget, when you really think about it, are fixed. They're not variable. Obviously, larger buildings with more amenities and more building staff may have more variance than a smaller building, but for the most part, most of these expenses are fixed.
But now you've taken on a new client, let's say where the budget wasn't based in reality. And the board doesn't want to raise maintenance. I mean, you've all said very sound reasons why it should be raised. Life is more expensive year after year, but there are boards who, for a variety of reasons, don't want to do that. How do you keep a budget, a realistic budget, front and center of the board so that you can bring them along to what reality is? Because clearly they've been resistant before.
Yeah, I mean, look, plumbers need wrenches, property management companies, we need our words. You need to communicate. And sometimes it takes more than one conversation. Part of it is having clear documents that can clearly present the budget in a make sense way. A lot of these issues that we're talking about, these are humans on the board, and there's a lot of financial illiteracy out there. I'm pleased to see a lot of these schools these days are now teaching it in the high school, financial literacy. So maybe there'll be less of that for the next generation of property managers. But until then, you need a dance partner. Sometimes boards are very sophisticated and sometimes they're less so. But really, after you get through all of the blocking and tackling, you have to watch out for certain types of issues. For example, water. Water usage for new construction buildings. A lot of times we'll take on a new construction building that is 1 or 2 years old. The developer sponsor was self-managing, or you have a property management company that's not used to dealing with new construction buildings, and the water bill will be underbilled until they get around to actually checking the meter. And so you have to escrow when you see that water usage is artificially low. You have to be able to look and see, okay, I know that's too low. I can look at an elevator expense line item the same way Danny and Peter can and know, okay, there's 4 elevators in that building or there's 1. So you have to look for these things, and your property accountants and your property managers have to have that extra level of expertise to say, okay, that water bill is not realistic. We don't want to necessarily go out and proactively reach out to the water billing agency and tell them, because it's obviously an advantage to our client to essentially have that interest-free loan with the underbilling, but you have to escrow for these kinds of things.
Let me ask you, most management companies, and I presume the 3 of you do too, provide a management report on a monthly basis. For boards who may not be used to that management report, how does that interface with the budget and with real dollars going in and out? Dan?
I think it interfaces very well. All of the reports are sort of designed to look at your expenses on a monthly basis, compare them to the budget that you have for that specific month, and then do it on a year-to-date basis. We craft the budget in a way that it is either seasonal or set up to align with the payments that a building is going to make. So if a building is going to pay their taxes, let's say twice a year, there's only 2 line items as opposed to 1 each month. And they're good tools. They're not the only tool that we use, but they're good tools.
Peter, are there other tools that your firm uses besides the management report?
Yeah, sure. So for our boards, we have a dashboard. So they see their real-time bank balances, their open payables, and their arrears. And that's a good reminder to them if they can't claim ignorance that there's $46,000 payables and no money in the bank account. Oh, why didn't you tell us? That obviously is gone. It also is a constant reminder that we've got to figure out a way to correct it. So that's been really helpful. As part of our management report, we load up the budget. So every month they see the budget versus actual. That's important for us too, right? We're looking for variances that are increasing, but they're seeing the end result. Where are we opposed to the budget? And if we're tracking below that and the money is not there, you better get a report and a project and a program together to make that correct as soon as possible. And that has been really helpful. I was not a big supporter of the dashboard idea because I thought a lot of boards would not really follow it close enough and it would just become a distraction, but it's actually been really helpful.
Before we conclude, I wonder if each of you could comment on what kind of work is involved in taking on a new client in your firms, and specifically what the incoming board can do to make the transition easier. Michael, can we start with you?
I mean, the number one thing is to put us in touch with the outgoing management company. We have a lot of formidable competitors. Sometimes it doesn't work out with our predecessor for whatever reason. And so it is easier if we can just work directly with the management company that's outgoing in terms of data migration. We also have a couple of people that are assigned specifically for migrations. That's all they do. So every month we have incoming business, and it's really critical to have those experts that, set up the bank accounts and get everything going, enter the budget, for example. So you have a credible budget versus actual right from the jump.
So let me ask you, I'm going to call that the administrative transition. How long should a board expect an administrative transition to go on before you have full understanding of the financials and all the other stuff in a building? Dan?
So I think it should take 30 days. There are some companies that it's going to take longer to do that whole migration, but it should take 30 days. I think, one of the important things is having the board involved in these migrations. We have tons of documents. We log in the documents. And part of the tricky part is you don't know what you're missing. So let's just say they replaced the roof 3 years ago. There's a warranty for that roof somewhere. You didn't know that they replaced the roof, so you didn't know that you were missing the warranty. So it's those kinds of things that sometimes get a little trickier. It's important for the board to be involved in the process, or at least when we're closer to completing the process. But I think generally we all work with a series of lists. We all have sort of similar procedures. And it's really a question of the outgoing company being cooperative, and giving us all the data.
I'm curious. So now you've done the administrative work and the board may be helpful, but the board probably had some other issues besides just the sort of paperwork and the administrative work. Some boards might think, I don't want to tell you all the issues. I hired you as a professional to come in and give me your assessment of what's going on. Would you prefer that? Or after you've got your administrative work tied down, how do you get the board to tell you this is kind of really why we left the other people and what we're
Yeah,
hoping for you?
I'll jump on this one. So the administrative part is obviously important because you can't run the building without it, but it's not usually that force the board to change. It is really, you've got to create that site presence. You've got to meet the staff. You've got to walk the building, not just your manager, but the compliance department. The firms that we work with in New York City, and I think most of them are ethical. It's been 20 years since I think I've been running to one that I was really like, wow, this guy's not what he should be. The people in this industry today, we're all vetted. We're all professional. If one of these guys called me up, if for some reason a board told me I'm zone of choice or I'm going to Gumley, I would understand. I would say, listen, we're going to work this out. And I would do everything we could to make it as smooth as possible. I don't think that's really the rub. For us, you got to create a site presence. The strength of all the people on this call is that we are not virtual. we will be at your building. If there's a problem, if there's a meeting, if there's a staffing issue, you're not going to get an email from overseas that says, hey, there you have a problem. You're going to have a person, a New Yorker or a person from this neighborhood, this area, who understands co-ops and condos, understands how to talk to people. And it's really a much higher skill set than I think any of us really even give ourselves credit for. We're going to come to the building. We're going to meet your shareholders. We're going to speak to your staff. We're going to cut to the chase faster than any other entity. Management companies in New York City are the best bang for your buck of any service that exists. I wish it weren't true to a certain degree. I wish we could something, once in a while get overpaid. It just doesn't happen. And because of my competition, the guys on this call, I know how hard we have to work every day. So part of that transition is proving why they hired you. Like all the guys here, we've all done the same thing. And so you check off all the admin boxes and you'll find a couple things. But if they don't see boots on the ground, and Carol, to your point, they might not even ask you if you visited the building during transition. I'll tell you this, though, they know. They know because they talk to the staff. They know because they're looking at the cameras. And we better have a higher bar than what they expect, or we're just going to be running this whole process through to the end in another year. And because I know I don't get buildings from the guys on this call, I'm sure they're doing the same thing. And I think we should be much prouder of the services that we provide to the city. I think that we provide more health and safety standards and quality of life improvements than any other business that's out there. No one says it. And Carol, I don't know if you even say it so much. It's the engineer is great. Oh, the fantastic water. It's the property management companies that take the slings and arrows, that answer the calls on Sundays, that get the person whose sewage is pouring down. Where is our award? Where is the manager of the year award? And where somebody says, you guys, thank you so much. Where is the mayor who wants us all to come to their garden behind Gracie Mansion and thank us for all our services that basically, if you figure it out by the hour, we're probably getting paid maybe minimum wage. So I would say it's a fantastic industry. I think it's only getting better. I think technology is helping. It's never going to replace the people on this screen. Thank goodness for us, I guess. And I think thank goodness for all of our clients. And the future is bright for us and the city. But Carol, I think you could send some more positive vibes our way.
Okay. Michael, do you have anything to add to this?
Yeah, well, I love Peter's sentiments. I think about COVID when we were all essential workers and coming in and driving around and going to buildings when the city was like a ghost town for a little while there. So I certainly echo those sentiments. But yeah, I mean, in general, we really view our clients as our partners. And we want them, and I think the vast majority of them largely view us as their non-equity partners. I always try to sit on physically next to them, shoulder to shoulder. So I'm on their side of the table at a literal sense, but also we want our clients to feel that figuratively. And so as to the question of, does the board want to kind of figure out and see how smart you are and see how you can find things that they already know about? To me, that's not a true partnership. I'd much rather have that conversation and say, hey, look, we're your counselor here. Let us know if there's things that you didn't tell us during the vetting process, during the courtship process. Now is the time, because we want to have all of that information at our disposal rather than sort of like a gotcha game. We absolutely want that back and forth communication. Apathy is certainly not our friend in our industry. And so you want clients to care and you want them involved. And certainly you want them to be disclosing things they know about that are potential issues.
Terrific. Thank you all for a very thoughtful and interesting discussion.
Thanks, Carol.
Thank you.
Nice to see everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Here.
Okay.